Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to talk about how to do the sketch for your landscape drawing. And I have another viewpoint of that same bridge that I did in the pen and ink drawing. This will apply to if you're working from a photograph and also if you're working outside. You can do the same thing. I recommend taking a photograph or a couple of photographs of wherever you are if you're working outside. So what I did first, this is my favorite way to draw, was I made a sketch, just freehand looking at my photograph. And usually I'm not that concerned with getting the proportions of everything exact. And then I noticed later I made a grid and a grayscale with the rule of thirds grid on there, and I could see that I had placed the bridge much higher up. I mean, my drawing is a little bit bigger too than this, so you can't tell exactly, but I figured it out that the bridge is a little bit too high up, and I actually made the water portion a little larger and the sky a little bit less, but I still got a nice rendition of it and I was happy with that. So that's what you can do. The main things that you want to do if you're doing that would be to figure out, I did a little bit of scaling with the bridge and I started out drawing the bridge because that's the main structure that I'm concerned with in that. And you could say take the length of the bridge and scale everything by that. So you could see you have one length of that and then maybe about a quarter. And I can scale how much from this tree in the foreground to the edge. I could just take one object just like we did for the still life and scale everything. How much is the water? Another thing you can do if you want to work with a grid, which will make it, in some ways it'll make it easier and you'll get everything probably, hopefully in better proportion. But it can also get a little confusing. I tend to get confused with grids. So what I did for that was I printed out a grayscale, and you should be printing out your photograph in grayscale so you can see all the values more easily as well as in color, and you can look at both of those and see how they compare. What I did was I made a smaller grid than the rule of thirds, because sometimes if you have a lot of detail, such as an image like this, it's easier to tell exactly where everything is. And then I labeled everything 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I ended up, because it was not an even number, I ended up with a little section on the end over here, and then I could kind of tell where everything is, and it'll be easier to keep things in perfect proportion or almost perfect proportion. And then what I do is I take a piece of tracing paper, I place it over this, over my grid that I drew. I just used, I think, a 2B or 4B pencil to draw that grid, maybe 6B, so it would show up better. I place my tracing paper over this. Make sure you tape everything down when you're doing this. You can see I still left the tape on here so it doesn't move around on you. And then I trace my grid onto the tracing paper. And then I take that and I tape it down onto whatever paper I'm going to do my drawing on. In this case, this is going to be a graphite drawing. And I just did it on regular drawing paper. And then I can transfer the grid. Now the way you do that is I always write right side if it's not a symmetrical grid, which this isn't because it has two little areas over here. Otherwise you could just flip it over and draw over it again, but since it wasn't, I had to draw over the back of it. Now just make sure you're using at least an HB pencil when you do this, because if you don't have a softer graphite, it's not going to transfer very well. And then I made some notations about where certain things are. Now this could help you whether you're doing a grid drawing or whether you're doing a freehand drawing, looking at the photograph or the landscape. And I said, here is where the sky meets the trees. I marked out where the top of the bridge started, and I think I marked on one of them, I marked the bottom of the bridge. I marked where the water starts, where this foreground shadow in the water is. I made little dots for all of that, and then there's another water shadow over here, and I marked all of that so I would have some idea. So in this drawing, say if you were starting out and you just want to do a freehand, but you want to have some type of sighting, because in this drawing that I did freehand, I did use the bridge to do scaling. If you wanted to do that, you could say, oh, you know, this is the distance. Actually, I should be looking at the photo when I do it. This is the distance that I'm going down over here. You know, this is this point over here. Or you could even use, just make a tracing without a grid if you don't want to work with the grid, but you want to know where all those lines are and you can't do it easily by eye. You can make these points on the tracing paper and then transfer them over to your drawing paper. So you would say, this is where the sky meets the tree. I'll just tape this down. This tape is getting kind of old, so it may not work perfectly. This is the top of the bridge. This is where the water starts. Water shadow. Second water shadow. Here is where sky. And you can see this line is a diagonal line that's going down, so it might be a little bit lower on some sides. This is the top of the bridge. I think I decided it was actually a little lower than I had it, because this is kind of at an angle too. This is where the water starts. This is where the shadow in the water starts. You can see on this side, it's higher up than on that side. So you want to kind of plan all these things out in advance. And then you would draw those lines first. So this was where the top of the trees was, and I know it's kind of a sloping down line, so I'm using a mechanical HB pencil, which is actually, I'm pressing very lightly with this, which is actually more like a 2B for some reason. I've heard a lot of people say that. Okay, so some reason. Okay, so this would be the sky area. I've just made the line between the sky and the trees. And I'm going to do a line where the bridge starts. This is the top of the bridge over here. Right now I'm just drawing things very basically. I'm not trying to refine anything or anything like that. Then I'm going to do the line for the water shadow, the first shadow over here, which just comes out to about here. And I'm going to do this line. Oh, that was the line where the water starts, actually. Okay. I didn't draw the shadow in on there. And I'm going to come back over here, and I think on one of my other drawings that I was doing, I made a line for the bottom of the bridge. But basically the bottom of the bridge and the landscape around it is right where the water starts. It just is a little bit further back on this side of the photograph than on that side. Then I would go over here, and I would say, oh, this is where my shadow started. And you can see the shadow is starting higher up. That reflective shadow in the water. I'm calling it a shadow because it's very dark. So it would be about there. So there I have, and then this part I can just draw in. I'm going to do this with stippling in my drawing. A tree and everything like that. So there I have basically the entire thing, and then I just have to figure out where the bridge is over here. So I can say, if I have this tree, I can just draw this tree in the foreground with the leaves. I can say it's about here, and then I can see, oh, by looking at the photograph, I can see, oh, this bridge starts around here, goes a little bit longer at the end side, and then I have my whole basic thing for the composition done very rapidly. Then I'm going to go back in and refine it. I can do more sighting using the length of the bridge. But you want to try and get these basic proportions first before you start going and doing too much detail. Now, if you prefer to use the grid instead of just freehanding it like I did. I really prefer this out of all the drawings that I did, even though it's not perfectly proportioned. So at some point I'm going to trace. I did this on sketch paper, so I can't really do a really good drawing or painting off of this, but I can do a trace transfer off of that if I want to. And when I'm painting my landscapes, I haven't done a lot of landscapes for quite a while now, but I used to do them a lot in the past. When I'm painting outside, I'm just painting with my paintbrush onto the canvas with a wash first, and I don't do any pre-drawings or anything like that. Okay, so if you're using the grid, and you can see what I did over here, once I've transferred my grid onto the paper, then I can see, like, where is this part of the bridge? It's in this part of the grid over here, and then part of the top of the bridge is coming up here. Now, the only problem with this is because you're doing this on a grayscale photograph, and you're using, I used graphite to transfer. It's a little harder to see it, and I tried going over it with a lighter acrylic pen that I use for highlights, but it was a little bit problematic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my metallic pens, like a gold or a silver that's more reflective, and then I'll be able to see the grid better that way. But that basically then I could see, you know, where do I want to put all these lines? Where is the bridge? Now, it's still not going to be perfection. I got some of these, this shadow area, that shadow area over here, and I just drew the trees in very, very lightly. I'm not trying to do a photorealistic rendition of this photograph. I've never really worked photorealistically, and I'm more concerned with just getting the generalized feeling of the landscape, more impressionistic. So once you do this, then you can either work directly on this, and then you would have to erase your grid lines, or you can trace off of this, which is what I did. Uh-oh, I dropped something there. I hope it wasn't something important. I guess I transferred this onto here. I don't really remember now if this was one of the ones I transferred. I think it was. And then I started doing some light shading and with the graphite, just using my HB pencil, so I know what are going to be the dark areas. I even wrote in, I think it was on this one. Was it this one maybe? No, this one is the one I was going to work on. On this one I wrote W for white, because that's a very light highlight in here, and I have a tendency to kind of forget about the lighter areas. That one is more obvious, but this one was a little bit more confusing for me when I was looking at it, so I wrote in on that. And either way, both of these have the grid on them, so they're going to have to be, you know, you're going to have to erase that grid, which is why you want to work with either an H range pencil or an HB pencil and press very lightly in the beginning when you're doing your sketch outline, because you want to be able to get rid of that and correct and everything. Now, I think I talked about this in one of the other videos, but you want to, if you want to do a lighter line, you just put less pressure, so you're doing shading, and you use the side of the pencil. Now, I started using some mechanical pencils, and I showed you how you can sharpen those. They have to be a little bit further out. I'll just show you again, and then you use your lead pointer, or you can use the sandpaper. And kind of do it at an angle. Just be very gentle with it. Don't put it in there with any force, because the lead can break. And then you can get a nice point. Now, another way you can sharpen it is to use the sandpaper sharpener. You can just sharpen the edges. A lot of people like these. Nice thing about this is I can take this graphite on here, and you can do this with charcoal too, and I can dust it off onto a plate or a container or something and use that to draw with a brush or a blending stick. So when you're drawing, if you're drawing with the point of your pencil, you're going to get a very sharp line, and I used a little bit more pressure. If you're drawing with the side, this is like a 2B, not really an HB, you're going to get a much lighter effect. And then of course you can go in and you can blend that, and I want to show you what happens when I blend that. I'm getting a very nice soft effect. When I try to blend a line, I can smear it a little bit, but I can't erase it really. You would have to go in, if I wanted to try and erase that, I would have to go with an eraser. And even there you can see, because I used a little too much pressure on that, it's going to be harder to erase. So you have to keep in mind all these things, these techniques. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be looking at probably the version with the grid on it, although I would prefer, I have another one, but I can't find it right now, where I just have the image. And I'm going to start laying in more of the dark tones, and then we'll do some blending, and I may try some new stuff with the sky. So this would be an alternative if you don't want to work in pen and ink. You can work with pencil, or you could even try this with charcoal too if you wanted to, because it's a little bit more forgiving than pen and ink, which you can't really erase. Okay, so now I'm going to decide which one I'm going to work on. I think I'm just going to work on this one, because I took a photograph of it already. Okay, now I can't, unfortunately I cannot have my drawing in here at the same time as drawing, because this is horizontal. Okay, so the pencils I'm going to be using, just make sure that this is all in here. I'm going to be using a 14B. I just ordered some new pencils, Brett Funer, and they were very inexpensive. They came from a range of 4H all the way up to 14B, because I wanted to have some softer pencils, and I didn't have any pencils in the H range. And this only cost about $5, so they're very inexpensive. I don't know if the quality is that great, but I'm going to find out today. And I'm going to be using maybe a 2H and a 4H for areas for lighter value. I tend to not like to use the H range pencils, and the reason is they tend to have a very sharp line if you draw with them. However, I have found, since I've been using this new pencil sharpener that I got, where I extend, I have a very long edge. Got this one on Amazon. I don't know what brand it is now. It's AFMAT. You just have to be careful with it. I'm going to do a whole video on how to sharpen pencils and stuff like that at some point. If I do this, then I can get a very light value. This is a 2H. It's not working as well because I have it flat, but if I just go very softly, or maybe I do some circular shading, because you don't always have to do lines. Circular shading is a good way to get a softer effect too, but you have to do it very, very lightly. And if I blend that with my tissue, you can see that I can almost totally erase those lines. Whereas if I draw with the point, even just using a very light, I mean, that is very light there, it can be hard to totally get rid of that. If I pressed a little harder, it's harder to get rid of that if you want to. Okay, so I'm also going to be using my kneaded eraser, my Faber-Castell dust-free eraser. I'm going to be using some blending stumps and some tissue. And when you're using the blending stumps, just keep in mind that a blending stump can be used to draw if it has graphite or charcoal. I think this is one that I used for charcoal drawing I did. So you can actually use that to draw as well as to blend. If you're working on a new drawing, you would want to clean off the blending stump or start with a new one, so you're not putting, you know, charcoal or graphite on there that you don't want to put on there. And I'm also going to be using probably a 6B Royal Sovereign pencil, which is an amazing pencil. This is an antique pencil. It was my mother's, and I found this quite a while ago in some of her drawing supplies. For some reason, I think I had worked with it a long time ago, but I took it out again and I said, I'm going to try this pencil. This is absolutely the best pencil I've ever used in my life, probably. Unfortunately, they don't make them anymore. You can buy some vintage sets of them on eBay, which I may do. And the only ones that I could find come in the B range, so I'm probably going to get those. I would like to see what they're like in the H range, because they may not have some of the problematic issues that other pencils have had for me anyway in the H range. These are made in Wales. Now they do make another brand. I don't know if they're still made in Wales, but they're called Wolves. So that seems to be what this was transferred to when they stopped making this particular line. And I'm going to work with my Faber HB a little bit, and then some of the mechanical pencils. The brushes are going to be for some blending too, and also eventually I'm going to show you how to do the drawing with the sketch wash pen, and I'll be using brushes and the water wash on the pencil to do that. Okay, so what we're going to do, I just saw that there's a really bad shadow over this drawing, unfortunately. I don't know why. I never had that in my videos before, and I don't know what's causing it, but I think you can see pretty good. Okay, so I'm looking at my photo. You always want to be looking at your reference, or if you're working outside completely, you could have your viewfinder. You can pin that up on the top of your easel, and you can use that to help you draw too, because you could see, you know, proportionally where things are going to be. You could even draw a light graph on your paper or whatever. So I'm going to start out first with my HB mechanical pencil using the side, and I'm going to start out laying some of these darker tones in. You always want to start lighter. Now some of these graph lines, I should probably try to erase these, lighten these up a little bit before I start. Actually, let me just do that. Some of these will get covered over by the darker values. I made them dark enough so that I could see them. And I don't want them to start showing up later in areas like the sky where I don't want to see them. You can see in this one I made a mistake and I had to lower the bridge, so I'll probably have to go back in with some corrective measure and lighten that up a little bit. I'm just using, kind of dabbing and rubbing a little bit with the kneaded eraser. I don't want to, I'm trying not to rub away all the lines of the landscape that I drew in, but I can see that. Okay. I'm going to come back in. This is the best eraser for really erasing things that you don't want in a drawing. Unfortunately, it creates a lot of residue that you have to get rid of before you can go back to work. Oops, unfortunately, I erased part of my landscape, but I can still see. Okay, so I've got rid of a lot of stuff that I didn't want to have in there later. And I'm just going to go over this to get rid of some of this with a brush. Use one of these dishes. Okay, so I'm going to go back in, I'm going to redraw some of the landscape. Hopefully I can see it. Now the good thing about landscape is it's very forgiving. If you're not trying to do a photorealistic representation of whatever you're looking at. You can just draw things in approximately, and you can still have a really beautiful drawing in the end. And there's a lot of artists. There was a famous artist, and I'm going to do that in this. I think I did it in the pen and ink drawing. I may have mentioned it. There's actually a house in the photograph here, and I decided that was too distracting, so I'm taking that out of the composition. Now you can do that. You can pick and choose what you want to have in there. And there was a famous artist. I've forgotten his name now, but I'll mention it in the module if I have time to look it up. He was a famous landscape artist. I don't think it was one of the artists that I covered in the lecture, but he was drawing a landscape scene, and the other artist asked him, he had a big tree in it, and they asked him, where is the tree? Because it wasn't in what he was looking at, and he said, oh, it's a little bit behind me. So he just decided that that tree would look good in there, and he put it in. Okay, so I'm going to go back to putting in my values. Now just keep in mind that this paper has a texture, and it's going to show through on the graphite. And eventually when you do the blending, you can kind of blend all that in if you don't want to have that. Sometimes you might want to use the texture of the paper. This is where I'm getting into some of the leafy tree stuff, but this is a pretty dark shadow. Over here, I'm still going pretty light. For the most part, I'm going to follow the rules of atmospheric perspective, which normally things which are in the foreground are going to be darker if it's a grayscale work, and more crisp and focused, and the values in the background are going to be lighter. This is one that has a very dark value behind the bridge, so I'm going to put that in. At the edge of the photograph, you have these reflections, and the water are coming into a very light value, so you're going to have a lot of contrast in the foreground too. Around here. Okay, now I'm going to go over here. I'm going to put in this reflective shadow on the water. I always start out with my darker areas first. Try not to make them too dark, and then I can always go back and make things darker. It's harder if you made something too dark. It's very hard to go back and lighten it, but there are things that you can do to do that. Now if we look at the shading specifically on the bridge, you can see that the front side of these portions of the bridge are darker, and then you have the light coming from the left, and then you have some dark shading on there. That's the basic value pattern for the bridge. I'm going to do that in. Somehow I erased part of the bridge, unfortunately. Let's draw it back in. This is kind of like a rectilinear form Just like those boxes you've been drawing. You see, I'm using the edges of my pencil here. I'm not using the tip as much, and I'm holding it far away. I'm still using the tripod position because I find it very hard to draw with the overhand position. I don't have as much control. But holding it farther away and pressing very lightly, you'll get lighter values that way. Okay, so now I'm going to draw in some of these leaves. These are pretty light. I have to redraw them because I totally erased them. Now I drew a line in here, but this is actually, there is a line for a dark shadow in here. However, a lot of it is covered by foliage, which I'm going to do. And then I have a little bit of a tree. Do some stippling, like I'm going to do the top tree. It's very pointillistic, so I'm going to do that with dots. I'm going to go in over here, the edge of the bridge. We've got a dark shadow on the left side. And you have quite a dark line over here too. It's a very strange structure in here because it appears to be moving up a little bit. And then I have what looks like maybe a hedge in front of that, and then some more shrubs and stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna go and put in these dark reflections and the darker areas in this part of the bridge. These are really dark, so I'm going to do them a little bit darker because I know it's not going to be a problem later. I have actually a highlight shadow area on that one. I kind of drew these as circles, these reflections, but they're not really circles. They're kind of a little rectilinear shape which curves out at the edge. Yeah, little reflections for this part of the bridge too. Now this bridge is actually, it's kind of hard to see in this photograph, but it's actually sloping back a little bit, probably because of the angle I took the photograph at. I'm going to put the value on the bridge. Now the bridge is one of the lighter areas, and there's some highlighted areas, and then the sky and the water, those are the light areas. I'm going to have a notes hand that I did with the Notenizer app, and I'll probably do that as a little exercise that you can do with the photograph of your scene, whatever you're drawing. Then you can see what the dark light balance is. Okay, I'm going to put in some of the shrubs over here because I drew this line is a little bit too dark there, so let me just get rid of that. Got some shrubs over here. And see how I'm just doing generalized lines to get the shape. I'm not worrying about it, and then I'm trying to follow the light pattern that I have. It gets a little bit darker over here. And I've got this dark value behind the bridge, which is going to nicely cover over where I had drawn it before and I erased. There's a little bit of a highlight on the top, those top portions of the bridge, so I'll probably go back, put that in with a chalk pencil later. there's a little, it looks almost like a cypress tree, but I know it's not over here. I'm just going to draw that in. Bush over there, and there's a taller tree. See, I'm almost drawing these in like little geometric shapes, just lines that show the pattern. This is going to be pretty dark over here, but I'm not going to make it. I'm going to see what I do with my foreground first before I worry about that area. This should be a little bit more in focus. These leaves are very close to the camera here, and they're much closer in the foreground. So things like that that are close in the foreground, you want to make them more focused. They're not, however, a darker value, so I'm just going to try to render the value as it looks there. Of tree shapes that I can draw in over here. Oops, I went a little bit too high up over there. Right about here, I have another tree. I have pretty dark value. This is actually too high up here. This coming up here. Another tree over here. It's actually over here. I've got kind of layers of trees. Unfortunately, they're not really delineated in the way you often see with those beautiful photographs of mountains going off into the distance where there's a very obvious transition. And here I have a whole range that's pretty close together, although the foreground is going to be very dark. I've also got a very dark value here. I've got a mixture over here, and over here I have lighter values in the foreground, so it doesn't always follow those laws of atmospheric perspective. This is pretty light too, but it's darker than these leaves and this plant over here. So I'll have to darken it up. I am actually just going to use stippling because that is a very beautiful pattern and it shows what the leaves look like, and then it gets a little darker over here. Okay, now another thing you should do when you're drawing, I can't do this because I'm working flat now, and it was just getting too hard for me. I'm recovering from a back injury and it was hurting me to sit at that easel for so long drawing. I have to get a better setup in my studio, but you should always be standing back looking at your drawing, because it's very hard when you're up close to something. You can't really see the values very well, and it's better if you can have it perpendicular to you to look at it, but I can't do that right now. So I'm not going to finish the entire drawing for this video. I'm going to start doing some blending with the tissues and see what I've got here, if I'm happy with it. So if you are working flat, I recommend that you, every once in a while, prop your drawing pad up on something or whatever and just take a look and see if you're happy. Now, one thing you want to do, I'm not doing the right thing here, usually, especially if you're doing something like a face, but even for a landscape, once you blend an area, you want to lift your tissue up if you're using a tissue, and use another part of it, because you're going to take, each time you do that, you're going to take a little bit of graphite off. And you don't want to be putting that, maybe there's an area where you don't want the graphite and you don't want to do that, right? I better do something that I forgot to do, which I keep telling you to do, which is to tape your drawing down when you're working on it, whether you're working on an easel or flat like this, so it doesn't move around on you when you're trying to draw or blend or whatever. Okay. I'm just going to soften. I'm not going to soften these lines as much because they're in the foreground, but you can always go back and make things crisper. I'm going to blend everything a little bit. I'm going to take a look at it again. Let's see what I got here. Okay, I mean, it looks pretty good. I can't tell for sure yet because I don't have all my values in. So I'm going to start going in the sky. It was kind of a hazy day and there's not much of a cloud pattern, but I may do something with some graphite or charcoal dust later to give the feeling of the tones in the sky, because there actually were clouds, they're just not very visible in there. I'm going to go back in with my 6B, the Royal Sovereign pencil now, and I'm going to darken up this portion, because remember that this was a very dark area in the drawing over here. It looks like this is even darker, but I'm going to try and this time, unlike what I did in the pen and ink drawing, I'm going to make this darker. There are some lighter areas of reflection in here too, and I'm going to make this a little bit lighter just to help with the atmospheric perspective. Okay, so I'm still using the edge. You can see how much darker. This is a very, very high quality soft pencil. Now, it doesn't always have to go that, you know, the name brands that are more expensive are better quality, but a lot of the time it is true for certain pencils. So, you know, you can always experiment and see what you have. I'm quite happy with these pencils so far. I haven't really done a full drawing with them. The Bradfuner that I just ordered, and those were not very expensive at all. Now, I don't know if you can see this or not, but there is a texture from the paper that's coming in. I'm still just building up my values here, layer by layer. Started with the 2B, now I'm going over it with the 6B, darken things up a little bit. Draw this in as the edge of the drawing so that you can see there's a very light value next to this reflection in the water. I can make some areas a little bit darker. So when I want to get rid of the texture of the paper, I can blend a little bit more. The only problem with that is that I am going to take off some of the value when I do that. Let me just try with the blending stump and see what happens. I'm going to put a new blending stump in here. I think I used that for the charcoal drawing last. Let's see, with here I can get a nice effect So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to use my blending stump. I'm going to put some more of the foliage and trees and stuff just with the circular motion. If you want to just work with a blending stump and you don't want to do it just by using the lead that came off when you were blending, you can create a powder like I mentioned. I'm going to do it with another pencil probably. Let me try it. With the 14B, I'm going to do, I'm going to sharpen this. This is my 14B. This might be a little bit too dark. And just go like that. And you see that? I've got some graphite I can use. I could use that with a blending stump, or this is very dark, so I'm only going to put it in the foreground or a dark area. And just take a little bit of that. Now, if you're worried that you have too much, you can always go and just have a little spare piece of paper and blend it around and see what it's going to look like first. Just going to add some of that in there. That's probably what I'm going to use in the foreground, the 14B. Okay, so I'm going to go back. Here, I don't want to get too dark here because this is going to be a lighter area. I'm going to put some more, there are some darker values in here too. Now I did a pretty dark value over here. I'm going to have to go back in. Extend that a little bit over here because it actually goes further to the left. This is where the house was, and I'm just going to put a feeling of some shrubs and trees here. So you can see, just with the blending stump, I got a really nice effect of the landscape. Do the same thing over here. A little bit darker over here. Some pretty dark values against this plant. And then this portion is lighter, so I'm not going to go too heavy on that. Okay, I'm going to go in with the 14B, which is my darkest pencil, softest and darkest pencil I have. To put in some of the darker lines again. I can get some more definition. This is a very soft pencil. I don't know if there's anything softer than a 14B. Now keep in mind there are different materials in different pencils. Some pencils, oops, I'm drinking a little bit of water and I just spilled it on here. Some pencils are made, especially, you know, just with a different binder. Like some have oil in them, some have wax, and that will have a different effect when you're using them. I'm just saying that because I'm wondering, this pencil looks like it could be one that it has a more waxy base to it. I couldn't find any of the ingredients about it on the package. I'm going to look it up online. I'm just going to outline, use the point of the pencil a little bit more over here to outline where it starts going into that lighter area in the reflection. Put some darker areas in. I think you can see I'm starting to get more spatial depth now. I can see that even just looking at it flat. Now, one thing you don't want to do is overwork a drawing. I've done that numerous times because I kept working on something for too long. So just keep that in mind, that you can take a break, go have a snack or whatever. If you're going to eat, of course, don't eat while you're working. But if you're taking a break to eat something, wash your hands. You remove any graphite or anything. And this is pretty messy. One thing you can do if you're working on a drawing, you're doing some very delicate shading. I'm not going to do that for this one, but for, say, you're doing a face or something, and you want to work on a certain area, and you don't want to smudge what you did or get graphite on your hands, you can put another piece of paper or tracing paper over it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go in with, I think, the 4H pencil. I'll start with that. And I'm going to put the value on the water, because the water is actually a darker value than the lightest value is probably over here, and then on some of the reflected areas. I'm just going to very, very lightly with my 4H, using the edge of the pencil. I'm going to add that in. I may leave a few little areas where I just leave the tone of the paper in, just to get that effect of all the reflections. Like over here, I'm not sure if this is something wrong with my printer, because my printer is doing very weird things lately when I print stuff out in grayscale. It looks like there's a light area over here, right near this dark shadow. See, so I just added a very light value there. I'm going to blend it a little bit. This I could just go in one pass because it's all one area, and I'll try not to blend. I can always go back in with my kneaded eraser or my pen eraser and pick up some more highlights if I want to later. But I tend to like to, when possible, I like to leave the tone of my paper if I'm using that to create highlights too. Okay, so now I'm going to go, I have my darker value in the foreground. I may go back and darken that up more. I'm going to put some of the darker values in the trees, and then I'm going to do something to the sky, and then I'll work on that portion last probably. So I'm not going to use the 14B for that. I'm going to try a 5B that I have. Now this pencil I have not sharpened to a point. I tried to do that, but it keeps breaking. This is a Stabilo. This is also another, this may be an antique. I haven't tried to look these up. And it's actually a 5B. And sometimes you might want to use the pencil this way. If you want to do very soft shading, you could do that. You want want to get some darker things, but you don't want it to be so sharp looking, like if you had a point on it and used the point of the pencil. Okay, so I'm always looking back at my reference photo here so I can see, am I, you know, getting the values that I see? Because I do want to get, although I'm not trying to do something photorealistic, I do want to try and get that feeling of the value patterns in the landscape. And again, it's much easier to see that if you print out your scene in grayscale, because it just does that automatically for you. If you're working with a viewfinder in landscape, I'm going to be ordering one at some point in time. A rule of thirds viewfinder you can use. You can find them sometimes that have a red filter over them, and that will block out all of the colors in the landscape so you could see the value pattern in grayscale more easily. Yeah, here there's a really dark line and then there's a highlight. A lighter highlight, or actually a lower highlight than this one. Okay, time to stand back a little bit and see. I think I put too many darker areas in here, so I'm going to try and refine it a little bit now. Darken this up a little bit above the bridge. Okay, I'm going to go back in with my blending stump. I'm just cleaning it off a little bit. I was using it with, I think I actually used it with the 4H, so it's probably okay. At some point in time towards the end of the drawing, after I've done my blending, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to refine things by making some of the lines crisper, maybe with point of a different pencil, or doing other things like adding highlights in with eraser or a chalk pencil, because I will want to have more definition than what I have here so far. Now what I would really like to do now is get a value on my sky. So I'm going to put some more of the trees in here, just indicate them. Darken them up a little bit, and then I'm going to do the sky. And then I'll probably do the tree that's closer with the leaves and the tree that I'm going to do with stippling later at the last part, and then I'll refine everything. Darken this up again. I'm just going to go back in with the 14B and I'm going to darken this up in the foreground again. remembering that there are still some reflections in the water, so I want to have some areas that are darker and some that are lighter, even in this dark value here. This is pretty dark over here, but it's not quite as dark, but I'm just going to go add a little bit. This, not too much. Remembering this is a light area and this is a very light area here too. Okay, so let me try blending again a little bit. I'm going to do some blending on here. Go back in here and put some of these darker areas in here with what's left over. And I have some of that graphite too I can add in. This is a lighter tree over here, so I'm going to put a darker value around it to make it stand out more. This is a lighter area over here too. It's the light. I'll have to come back and pick some highlights over here because it's actually got quite a lot of light higher up there. Okay. Okay, I'm going to fill in the sky now. What I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my 4H pencil. And I'm going to create a little bit of graphite from that because it'll be lighter. I might want to actually try the 4B, I'm not sure yet. Let's try this in one area and see what happens. Now this time I'm going to try with a brush instead of a blending stump. I'm just going to see what result I get. I think this is a little too dark, maybe. I'm just going to put a little bit on over here. Usually, not always, but usually the sky even if it's a hazy day, it will be a little bit darker at the top. Not always, but okay, let me see. I still feel like that's a little too dark, maybe. I'm just going to blend this down. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my kneaded eraser. Now you can see what's going to happen. I'm going to get a mark from the eraser. If you don't want to get a mark like that, I'm actually trying to lighten it up, so I'm just going to pick up some of that graphite because I want it to be a little bit lighter than this. But what you can do if you don't want to get a mark like that is you either do a little bit of erasing or you just put a little bit of graphite on the eraser and then press it on the paper, a side paper a little bit, and then you can go back in. And then you can get a softer kind of a hazy effect, which is what I'm trying to get here because it was an overcast day. So I felt like that was a little bit too dark. I'm going to darken up the trees and then that will look lighter. So I'm going to try that with the HB. It could be because this is a different type of pencil. That's why I got that result. So let me try with another brand. This is the Faber HB pencil. Let me see if this makes any difference. Let's clean my brush off. I have a couple of dishes of water here, which you should probably have if you're doing this type of thing, using brushes so you can clean them. But I have them ready for, I'm going to do another video of how to do this with the sketch wash pencil. Problem with this is then I have to really have it be drier to do this. Alright, so that one is out of commission for now. I'm going to have to use this one, which is one of my best brushes. Alright, we'll try it. See, so here I'm literally painting with the graphite, which is kind of cool. If I get too dark, I can always go in with the kneaded eraser and just lift some of it up, or the tissue. Here I'm just going to go around this area because I'm going to go back and stipple over here eventually. I'll say if I had a cloud here, this would be a really good way to do this, is you would just go in with your brush and leave certain areas the tone of the paper, and then you can get that effect of clouds, you know, where you have the shadows, sometimes have the lighter areas. In fact, I'm just going to do that here and pretend there's a few clouds hanging around in here somewhere. Another thing you can do to get that effect is go back in with your erasers. And just highlight areas. Blend that as long as you're careful not to cover up. If you want to keep those areas, just don't blend over them with the tissue. The idea is I'm trying to get, although I'm adding some clouds in now because I kind of knew I was going to do that, but I'm trying to keep it the lightest at the baseline because that seems to be the general pattern when you're looking at skies, is any colors that are reflected or whatever is going to be a darker value in the top, and as you go to the trees or whatever, it's going to get a little bit lighter. Okay, now I can't really see this. At this point, I would like to pin this up. So the last thing I'm going to do on the video, I'll come back and show this in the module or do another mini video where I attach it, is I'm going to go in, just trying to figure out which range pencil I should use. I'm going to do some of the stippling with that tree. I think I'm going to start out with the 2B, the mechanical pencil. So here I'm doing something like one of the drawings I had in the lecture was by Van Gogh, where he just uses stippling and very abstracted lines to depict the landscape. And I'm doing that here because I have these beautiful leaves, and I can make it a little darker where indicate where there are branches there. It does get darker as we get closer to here. So I should probably add, and what I'm going to do real fast, I'm going to add a value over here. And then I can just stipple over that. Here in this area it starts to get a little bit less stippling, so I'm going to work with some lines, working with the side of my pencil to get darker values, and I'll just have a few dots. I'll probably soften this up a little bit more. Put some highlights in here. Just very gently touching this with the Kleenex. Just to soften the dots a little bit. I'll have to work more on that area. And then the last thing I'll do before I stop this video, and I'm going to refine it more, is I'm just going to outline these leaves of the tree in the foreground, which are actually lighter than this tree over here in the background. I just want to give an indication of that. I'm not trying to do, you know, I really can't even see, it's kind of blurred anyway, but I'm going to make it look like it's not, to give an effect of aerial perspective. And then I have to decide on a value. Now this is a lighter value. There's more than one value in this, but I'm going to try working on it with a 2H. Just do some circular shading, and then I'll blend it. And I can go back later when I refine everything and put some darker areas. Now I did have what looks like, I'm not really sure where that tree is that's coming out at the top, but it looks like part of it, or another tree that's similar is down here, so I'm going to add some more stippling in. And then here I think I got a little bit messy, so I'm going to go back over here and try and draw a branch that's coming in here. Actually, I should do that with a darker pencil. I actually have some leaves coming over here too from this one. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to do for now for the video, and I will show the finished version of it. But there you have, oh, I gotta do a little bit more. This tree comes out over here a little bit too. I have the entire scene, and I have to refine some of the values and put some highlights in. And I have to look at this when it's up on my easel because I can't really see the values that well here the way I normally do. Okay, so you got the basic idea of what to do with this, and I'll probably do one more video where I use the sketch and wash. Pencil's a little bit harder to work with a wash when you're first starting out drawing, so you can choose to use the pen and ink, a charcoal if you want, and you should have a soft and a hard charcoal and use your white chalk pencil too, and the tone of your paper, or you could do a graphite drawing like this and try some of these techniques too if you want to. Okay, have fun with this one.